Hello there, and welcome to Weird Music on the Glumberg channel. The strange music show that dives into all sorts of, different things, music, sounds that we can listen to. So in today's episode, we of course have another drone album, right? So this is one I have wanted to cover since I first conceived of actually making this show about 3 years ago now, my goodness. But instead of getting around to returning to this artist when we first established them, I went off on some very weird tangents, never thought to return to it. Until now, of course. So yes, today we are returning to the wonderful world of Alvin Lucier, American experimenter of sound art, with a look at a long-form drone experience that is just right up my alley, right? So yeah, without further ado, I present Music on a Long Thin Wire by Alvin Lucier. So, as mentioned, it's been a long time since we last looked at an album by Alvin Lucier. In our first video, which I think was like the 8th episode in the entire series, we took a dive into I Am Sitting in a Room, which I guess can act as a poor rudimentary introduction to the wonderful experimental artist. So in today's episode, we're diving into an album I've wanted to discuss on the show for a long time, and only recently got around to writing about. Music on a Long Thin Wire. So what is Music on a Long Thin Wire? Well, this is an album counterpart to the sound installation project of the same name. So conceived all the way back in 1977, the project saw Lucier creating sublime drone through his unusual process. So all of Lucier's projects involve processes of some kind, hence why I like to describe it as process music. But I'd argue that out of all of them, this is perhaps one of the more musical ones in some respects. But to better describe it, let's just hear from Lucier himself. Music on a Long Thin Wire is constructed as follows. The wire is extended across a large room, clamped to tables at both ends. The ends of the wire are connected to the loudspeaker terminals of a power amplifier placed under one of the tables. A sine wave oscillator is connected to the amplifier. A magnet straddles the line at one end. Wooden bridges are inserted under the wire at both ends, to which contact microphones are embedded, routed to a stereo sound system. The microphones pick up the vibrations that the wire imparts to the bridges and are sent through the playback system. By varying the frequency and loudness of the oscillator, a rich variety of slides, frequency shifts, audible beats, and other sonic phenomena may be produced. So yeah, a process that results in drone music, right? Very cool. Definitely very similar to Ella Thurman's long string instrument that she's so well known for, but it's a little bit of a different setup. But yeah, definitely the kind of thing I'm down for, right? So what is this album version then? Well, released in 1980 on Lovely Music, this album comprises 4 compositions together into one listening experience. And so with each track lasting roughly 20 minutes, we're kind of given a sort of maybe arguably a microcosm of the sonic drone experience that Music on Long Thin Wire offered, navigating low ends to high frequencies and everything else in this sort of weirdly randomly generated sequence of sorts. It is a sonically fascinating experience, one that reveals a myriad of hidden details hidden in amongst the drones the more it all occurs. And of course, very excited to discuss it, so let's dive in. So Music on a Long Thin Wire, opening up with part 1, of course, right? So the occurrence is this very wide expansive oscillation of a note vibrating in the stillness of the very air itself. And this becomes the drone that occupies the scene. The occurrence of this continually produced note for the entire duration of this recording. An oscillating drone. The more it all occurs though, the more you kind of start to see like these very unusual shapes that the drones make though. These large vibrations against the long wire that swell into these various sizes. And as a result of the setup used for it, it becomes this process that results in just pure sustained drone music, which I think is very cool. Like, I always remember being so fascinated by this album when I first came across it when discovering the work of Alvin Lucier for the first time. This long-form drone album of singular sustained notes. It was just right up my street, right? And I remember delighting in the furthering descent the oscillations produce as a result of this strange process. Like, I appreciate that Lucier's approach of just amplifying the sound of the vibrations of a wire set off by a magnet, suspended by large horseshoes and amplified by the contact mics below into the amplifiers, it just results in something that sounds like this. This very weird, unusual setup, resulting in the occurrence of hypnotizing drone music. I always thought there was something incredibly neat about it. Like, naturally occurring music in the form of dense vibrations, essentially. But it's what I think is very neat about drone music in the first place. Like, the result of this particular setup results in something that we get to experience, and I think that's something very cool. And like, the very first track here, is very interesting in that it just offers up this very intense low end for the most part, which I just think sounds so delightful, so easy to immerse yourself in, especially when you get these really amazing, menacing rumbles of low end that drift in amongst those vibrational patterns. But it's the randomness of it all that fascinates me, as it results in something oddly musical, yet very minimalist, right? And me being an enjoyer of drone, I just think it's neat. But this track is one that I've always responded to, as it seems to offer like just a delightful deluge of low ends, one that reveals so much character at the strangest moments from time to time, vibrating louder and more wildly, shifting the scene before it settles back into the recesses of the sustained drones once more. Like, the songs and tracks are all very similar in some respects, but slight variations in the setup produce very different effects when you listen to it. And I like how whatever this particular setup was resulted in this sounding track, because it's definitely one of my favourites, if not my top favourite, but weird to think about, isn't it? So yeah, as mentioned, although the process is the same across the 4 different tracks, small subtle variations result in small fluctuations that change the tones. So as a result, you do get 4 different sounding tracks, each with their smallest differences. So for the second track, part 2, the sustained tones, they seem to offer for a slightly higher frequency as it begins, pitched a little bit higher than the low end rumble of that first track. And the oscillations themselves, it's like they seem to ripple outwards with a much stronger sense of urgency almost, as though this is one being witness to some cosmic entity perhaps. But what I find really cool is how simply the result of those very minute changes just fluctuate the resonance of the wire in very different ways, creating for us as listeners different drones to experience born from that very same setup. Very weird, as although the sounds are different, it's tricky to talk about in great details because it's just drone, essentially. Like, the process still brings the same, that means, still being the same, means nothing different is objectively being done, meaning what is there to discuss. But I hardly think it's a bad thing, right? Because I like the setup, and I like the process resulting in many different drone experiences as a result of the small micro movements in the setup. Small variations changing the scene and landscape. And it's interesting because it exists. This is a thing we can listen to, and I think it's really cool as a result of that. But whatever setup was done for this one, it just creates this very weird sort of wobbly drone that oscillates, rather wildly across the lengthy runtime, yet still creating a sort of sense of stasis as though time's been stopped completely. That often occurs as a result of listening to drone music, right? So then, what does track 3 sound like? Well, this one opens up with sustained feedback of drones once more before the wave of oscillations to start drifting in like delay effects almost. Another hypnotizer that seems to just swarm the scene with a further descending of notes before opting for complete silence for these brief moments. The sounds being flung into the opposite direction as the oscillations seem to reverse, if that makes any sense. Like, I don't really know because I don't have that much of an idea, but it seems to be what's happening when we listen to this one. But as a result, the whole thing feels a little bit more quieter and a bit more maybe minimalist, devolving into pure noise on sparse occasions, it feels, pulling between wild vibrations, and then going into silence in the form of just stillness, perhaps. It's oddly enough a bit of an engaging composition as a result of the ebb and pull effect that's naturally occurring as a result of these particular settings, and I think it's without doubt one of the cooler tracks on here actually. It's now interesting, it's maybe not my favourite because I really adore dense low ends that you get in drone music, especially that we had in the first track, right? But I do think it's very interesting hearing the different sides of the same setup and hearing this one do very different things despite being the exact same setup as I mentioned. Different presentations of the slight variations and what those variations can produce the effects of. Like, it's interesting because this one unfolds with such a menacing vibe, it feels, before pulling itself towards silence, before becoming an overwhelming deluge of noisy drones at times. It's truly amazing though, and one that I just adore that hypnotizing quality of, as it's so easy to just get immersed completely in whenever you sit down to listen to it. And so of course our final track, part 4. So this one slowly develops from a deluge of frequencies before the most satisfying vibration of low end occurs, echoing in your very ears with that wonderful resonating effect. As a result, this is probably one of my favourites, as it once again offers that same ebb and pull effect that the previous drones have offered, but with a lot more low end. Now, I don't know why exactly, but I just adore the low end frequencies in drone music like this, you know? And I think just to call back to it again, I think this is my awareness of my enjoyment of certain resonating frequencies in drone music, the kind of thing that my body responds to when I listen to it. Like, I just seem to love hearing densely layered lows, because it just feels like, the mind, it just fills up the mind entirely with this, pouring of thick, syrupy drones, just drowning in those wonderful layers. And the way this particular drone just sounds is something I find to be so pleasing, and one of the reasons why I just adore listening to it. Like, definitely my favourite of the 4, especially with how it just slowly builds up with that wonderful intensity, all as a result of this very weird setup that Lucier designed for this, right? So, difficult album to summarise, right? But I will try my best. It's a very odd album, as it's not really composed music at all, but rather just occurring music or occurring drones, so perhaps even bordering on generative music, right? So whilst the setup itself is largely quite flashy in a needless way, like Lucier has said even a shorter wire would achieve the exact same result, the point seems to be to create process music by creating an occurrence of drone that is manipulated by associations and occurrences along the length of the vibrating wire. And the amplification of this weird little setup results in pure sustained drone music. And I think that's really, really cool. As well as it being processed, you have, you have this very cool result of those processes. And as well, committing that to physical media, resulting in this particular album. A version that always sounds the same, maybe. Now that it's a bit of a weird tangent, but considering the project setup always results in different things based on it, the album version, when you re-listen to it, is always going to sound the same, and that's interesting. But it still acts as, a version of the setup, if that makes sense, a representation of some of the things it could achieve, with perhaps you needing to use your imagination to wonder what else it could have done, in terms of still tiny fluctuations, of course. But it's strange to me, the physical releases of processes fascinate me, because they become in-tuned versions of those occurrences themselves. And this particular one is one I truly delight in, as the particulars of the drones and the way they sound on this release are ones I find to be truly rewarding. Just a fascinating little part of the extensive work by Alvin Lucier. And as mentioned, it's fascinating as you get an occurrence of something oddly musical happening here, even with Lucier's completely hands-off approach. It's perhaps the very point of the project of itself, just create the setup and let the setup create the experience. Then the fact that it resulted in just sublime drone music, something I find to be amazing. This project has been performed numerous times with many different variations in terms of tones and frequencies, and yet Lucier saw fit to have these particular 4 versions, out of the multitude of possible versions, released on physical media. I think that's awesome. The representation of sound installations in the form of physical media, the fact that something that is so gargantuan and unable to really be comprised into a CD still gets a CD release anyway, because then you still get a version of it that you can approach. Like, this is the kind of thing you see a lot from line imprint, actually, audio representations of much bigger installations, reducing it down for home audiences, perhaps. So perhaps the spectacle is missing. But the album releases themselves remain fascinating in their own right for existing as musical releases. But I digress, because I think we're getting a little bit off topic here. So, as I seem to often say in these drone videos, viewers know for my love of the genre, the particular resonating quality that singular tones can have, especially when they delve into the wonderful low ends, and it's just something I find to be wonderful, right? And although the particulars of how these drones sound is rather unintentional, it's resulted in a few compositions that I find to just be sublime. Perfect vibrations to lose yourself within for 20 minutes. And I just seem to really enjoy the way long singular drones just sound, the way they inhabit your entire being when you listen to them, and how you completely lose sense of time itself as it occurs constantly. Like, I remember when I first came across music on a long thin wire, this strange long-form drone experience in amongst this rather eclectic discography from such a curious experimenter of sound, one who followed his muse to simply discover the results of what happens during unusual processes. And in amongst all of that amazingly creative discography is this particular drone album. Perfect for us who love drone music, right? And so yeah, I think with that we'll be coming to the end of our episode on weird music, Alvin Lucier's weird music, right? So glad to have talked about Lucier once again, because I've been meaning to return to his wonderful experimental music, and this kind of, I think, bridges the gap between, like, all the drone music I really like, as well as my interest in Lucier's music as well. I think it would be interesting to return to some other albums he has done, but I think we'll have to see if we ever get around to it. But hopefully there won't be a 3-year gap between that, but we'll have to see, of course. So if you have made it this far, then, and you are a fan of Alvin Lucier, then please let me know in the comments below what is one of your favourite projects by Alvin Lucier and why. If you want to check out music on A Long Thin Wire, then I will leave links to it below, of course. I think it's only available on YouTube, but you'll get the gist of it. Otherwise, I would like to thank you for watching today's episode of Weird Music. I wish you all the best, take care, and bye-bye for now. Bye-bye.